短期もうちょい増やしてくんないかしら。
無理だろう。入れる業者もか。
どんな女がタイプだ。
女の趣味を話さないといけないんですか。
退屈だよ伏黒。
Dumping points into your strength stat is generally the best start to any good sorcerer build, as it allows you to survive the modern day servers of Jujutsu Kaisen, which can be very unforgiving at times. The switcher build, however, takes this idea a step further by synergizing his overwhelming strength stat with a deceptively powerful curse technique. A technique which surprisingly isn't even counted among the legendary techniques in the game. So today we'll be covering the story mode character Todo Aoi to find out just how viable the switcher build is in the current Jujutsu Kaisen meta. In this video, I'll be analyzing the switcher player Aoi Todo. I'll be showing you the ins and outs of his curse technique Boogie Woogie and breaking down everything his unique build is capable of. At the end of the video, I'll be giving it a rating out of 10 by how much I would recommend it to new sorcerer players in the Jujutsu Kaisen servers. The categories I use as per usual fall into these 5 sections of the video: rarity, abilities, stats, ultimates, skill ceilings, and matchups. Depending on how you build your character though, there are also unlockable classes that can be factored in. Todo, surprisingly, yeah, actually has one, but I'll preface it by saying that we only know about it through leaked gameplay, so for those who don't want spoilers, I will give you a reminder in that section. Alright, without further ado, let's jump right into the story mode. Alright, to get a better understanding of Todo the character, let's start at the beginning. Todo Aoi starts his playthrough out as a normal kid in Japan with only one notable difference. He spawned in with a body that offered him a couple extra strength points as a starter bonus, which allowed him to easily outcompete opponents even far outside of his own weight class. This extra strength, however, would be a hindrance in his earlier years since there was little to no challenge in winning fights for him. Luckily for Todo, this life of boredom would all change when he had a chance encounter with one of only 4 special grade sorcerer players in the server, Tsukumo Yuki. Although it's not shown on screen, we know from official sources that Yuki's training was intense, to put it lightly, which is actually how this player acquired his signature scar. After becoming the disciple of the special grade sorcerer, Todo would go on to join Jujutsu High. We pick up with him in the main story as a 3rd year in Jujutsu Tech. The first major battle he gained notoriety in was the story mode event known as the Night Parade of 1,000 Demons. This event was hosted by one of the 4 special grade sorcerers playing as the Necromancer, where he used his ability to release 1,000 cursed spirits in both Shinjuku and Kyoto. Todo single-handedly claimed 5 first grade cursed spirit eliminations as well as a special grade, bringing the total to 6. This is actually impressive for 2 reasons. The first reason being that he doesn't actually allow himself to use his curse technique when in battle with anything not ranked as a special grade. Secondly, he himself is only a first grade sorcerer, which would technically score him as weaker than a special grade. Going further into the story, we get to see the Kyoto exchange event in Jujutsu High where Todo encounters
ケツとタッパのでかい女の子かな。ジェニファー・ローレンスとか。
どうやら俺たちは親友のようだな。
The main character of the JJK story mode ends up befriending Todo early on due to him actually managing to pass his extremely difficult QuickTime event. From then on, these two were known for teaming up against opponents to devastating effect. If you found yourself in battle with one, it's safe to say that the other would drop everything that they were doing just to get online and join the battle. And let's just say you don't want to be on the receiving end of that. But that mostly sums up Todo's part in the Jujutsu Kaisen story mode, so with that said, let's move on to Rarity. Before I tell you what I would put Boogie Woogie as, let me first explain the rarity system in a bit more detail. As you know, common rarity is what you can likely get by joining the server, while mythical rarities have either impossible odds or the power is a finite resource. When it comes to rolling for a curse technique, I break it down like so. Rolling a common technique is basically the same as having no curse technique. An uncommon technique is an ability so unorthodox that it's generally hard to apply in any practical circumstance. Think the straw doll technique, for example. A rare curse technique is an ability that is effective in combat but basic in its nature. Epic rarities are PvP-centric abilities that can be used with great potency. Legendary and mythical rarities are actually the exact same as epic, except legendary requires that you roll another rare attribute and mythical requires that you possess an attribute that is finite in nature. If I had to assign the Boogie Woogie technique a rarity, I would probably just give it a rare. Oftentimes how powerful a sorcerer player is can be misconstrued with spawning in with a broken technique, but that simply isn't true. In fact, I would go as far as to say that your average user of a rare or epic technique defeats the user of an average legendary or mythical technique. How rare an ability is doesn't necessarily always equate to strength, which is why I don't typically recommend rolling for abilities with low odds. For anyone that cares about making a good character, then I would generally point you in the direction of rare and epic techniques, and Boogie Woogie is a great example of this. The technique in this instance doesn't define the sorcerer, instead the sorcerer defines the technique. To understand what I mean by this, let's get into the stats. Now, I'll be frank with you, these stats are nothing short of insane. Achieving these stats purely through the Jujutsu skill tree and having no conditions or buffs to assist you is impressive by any metric. These stats are the stats of someone who not only knows what they're doing as a player, but knows exactly how to play to their strengths and battle strategies as a switcher. One of the best stats he has here is his battle IQ, which actually comes from a passive ability we will get into in just a moment. But first, to properly assess where these stats are coming from, we need to dive into the abilities. Cursed Energy Reinforcement is a basic primary ability that comes with being a sorcerer. One of the first things you learn how to do as a sorcerer is both guard and attack using Cursed Energy. When you guard, you cover your body in Cursed Energy to block the attack, and when you go on the offensive, you infuse your Cursed Energy into kicks and punches. The power of said ability scales directly with how much Cursed Energy you have and how well you can control it. All in all, pretty basic ability that is fundamental to all of Jujutsu. The rare curse technique Boogie Woogie, as I'm sure you already know, is the ability to both select and swap the locations of two designated targets. Although it is a relatively simple ability, I will give you a little bit of a more precise breakdown. Firstly, any and everything you can think on the server has some level of cursed energy, with players that acquire a heavenly pack to remove their cursed energy being the sole exception. Due to this phenomenon, Boogie Woogie is able to target specific items or players and swap their XYZ coordinates with the condition that it is activated by a clap. Since this ability is capable of targeting specific cursed energy signatures and isn't necessarily a physical attack, it can't be blocked, similar to the sure hit effect of a domain expansion. It is also worth mentioning that while a clap is necessary to activate Boogie Woogie, it doesn't have to be both of your hands that have to clap. It instead just has to be one hand connecting to a surface that can make a slap sound that is recognized as a clap by the game's engine. There is also a hidden trick to Boogie Woogie that only a small minority of players actually manage to figure out. The act of clapping itself isn't recognized as a swap, instead only providing a movement opportunity to the player. When a player selects their two targets and activates the ability, for a brief moment they will receive an opportunity to swap. It is, however, possible for the player to simply ignore this movement opportunity to trick their opponent into believing a swap has occurred. In the heat of battle, it can often be more disorienting for the opponent to not swap in that scenario. That actually about covers all of Todo's primary abilities. That being said though, this much is actually just scratching the surface of what makes this character build so powerful. To get a more full picture, we need to jump into the passive ability. Before we continue this video, I want you to know that this video is still sponsored by me. Listen, I won't waste your time so that you can get right back into the video, but I genuinely do feel like I need to thank everybody for the massive support on the last video. It was so much support that we smashed my end year goal of 10k by February. If this kind of growth keeps up, then it's kind of crazy to say, but I might actually become a full-time YouTuber. So like I said in the last video, the more you guys support this kind of content through liking, subbing, commenting, one of them, all of them, the more videos I can get out to you, and with a quicker turnaround time too. Literally at this point as a YouTuber, the algorithm is looking at me with a skeptical lens, deciding whether or not I'm worth it to show to people, so all those buttons do so much for this channel. Also, quick light novel update, I'm currently working through beta reads and working on art. No definite release date yet, but I'm estimating about 3 months. Anyways, with all that said, a big thank you to you guys and the beautiful channel members that make all this so fun, and let's get back to the video. 171, the toast is not working. Back into the video. I told you it's because there's no outlets in here, they don't exist. Simple Domain is a skill Todo acquired from the training he endured with special grade player Tsukumo Yuki. Although there are multiple applications of Simple Domain, we'll simply be looking at the basic version since that's all we see Todo use. Simple Domain is one of only 3 anti-domain techniques ever invented in the game, and it works as follows. Domain expansion consists of 3 separate components: Innate Domain, Curse Technique, and Advanced Barrier Technique. A large amount of cursed energy is used to construct the innate domain, and the curse technique is placed inside the barrier to generate an auto-hit effect. What a simple domain is capable of is making a domain that is devoid of an innate domain in curse technique, instead only deploying a blank barrier. It might seem pointless, but it actually exploits a massive vulnerability when 2 domains have to fight. An OG player that went by the handle Saratsuna Asha during the Heian era update wanted to find a way for him and his party to defend against domain expansion, which was pretty common at the time. To this end, during his playthrough, he actually made a groundbreaking discovery in the game's code. Whenever the barriers of 2 domains are deployed over each other, they will enter what is referred to by the game's code as a domain clash state. When 2 domains are clashing, they push against each other until eventually the stronger one wins out. However, Asha discovered that in said state, the auto-hit effect of the domain is actually set to false and can only resume once the barrier is restored. Although a simple domain is physically incapable of winning a domain clash, that was never the intention to begin with. The intention of the technique is to be used as a last-ditch effort to prolong the fight and give the user enough time to defeat the enemy and collapse the domain. This ability unfortunately comes with a binding vow prohibiting the giving of prerequisites to this ability to any player outside of your party. Either way, for a player without a domain like Todo, this skill is definitely a great asset on the field regardless. Prodigy is a passive ability that you're likely to get just by advancing through the game in Jujutsu High. Due to the quality of education and instructors, it is likely that you can acquire a lot of game knowledge and develop a sense for Jujutsu law. The odds of acquiring this ability are also significantly increased when instructed by a special grade sorcerer. That is basically what the Prodigy passive ability does, but Todo doesn't just have Prodigy, he has what I like to call Max Prodigy. He was one of only a few players to not only realize you can spec points into the Prodigy passive skill, but also genuinely max out the skill. He has a self-proclaimed IQ of 530,000, and while an unverified claim, we certainly see some downright inhuman feats of intelligence and battle IQ from his gameplay. In the story mode fight of Itadori and Todo vs Hanami, we get a cutscene where Todo reinforces himself with cursed energy to tank the move Cursed Buds. However, in the next moment, we are able to see the inner workings of his brain and watch him deduce that the buds would likely flourish from him reinforcing with cursed energy. In the very next moment, we see him then dispel that cursed energy. Why was this so impressive? Well, because, no joke, this move was literally frame perfect. His logical deduction and action took only a frame of time. This passive ability not only gives him deadly precision with his cursed technique, but his mid-battle reasoning is second to none. The passive ability Cursed Energy Mastery isn't as simple to unlock as you would think. Cursed Energy Mastery only comes to specific sorcerers that are able to engage a part of the physics engine in Jujutsu Kaisen that most aren't able to. The Black Flash mechanic. A Black Flash is when a curse user strikes someone, but within 0.00001 seconds of that attack landing, the user's cursed energy is applied. When done correctly, this will cause the game to briefly lag, making the cursed energy flash black and adding a 2.5 damage knockback multiplier to the one blow. Also, to quickly make note, Black Flash isn't an armor-piercing attack. Attacks are only armor-piercing if the soul is being perceived and struck. As far as we know right now, Black Flash is just really fucking hurt. As an added bonus of the Black Flash, you unlock a state called the Zone where for a brief moment of time, your control of cursed energy no longer needs manual input. After you lose the Zone state, you are left with the passive ability Cursed Energy Mastery, which will then on improve your cursed energy control and fights drastically. And that just about wraps up the passive abilities, so we'll now move on to the special category. Now I will preface this part by saying that we are getting fully into Elite gameplay territory. If you don't want to see any spoilers, just skip to the skill ceiling section. I'll keep this part short anyway. Alright, with that being said, after the battle with the cursed spirit player Mahito, Todo loses his hand. The clap for Boogie Woogie, while simple, ultimately can result in a complete technique loss if the conditions can no longer be met. Todo, without his hand to clap, can't activate Boogie Woogie by himself. Is what you would think. The Switcher player actually discovered that the technique was a lot more forgiving than he assumed and would actually allow him to engage the binding vow system to propose a hand swap. In the final battle against the reincarnated King of Curses player, Todo unveils his new curse tool, which is a Vibraslap. Through a binding vow, he changed the condition to a clap to a hit of the Vibraslap. In case you didn't know, this is the sound of a Vibraslap. And yes, every one of those vibrations counts as a swap. To use the terms correctly this time, Boogie Woogie has a high skill ceiling. A skill ceiling so high that it actually leads me to an extremely hot take here. Boogie Woogie for most people is actually completely unusable. Remember how earlier in the video I said that rarer epic techniques are typically made by the user? Well, this is the best example because Boogie Woogie simply cannot be properly utilized to its full extent by your average sorcerer. Unless you have incredible practice, you will at the very best only be able to use Boogie Woogie to an underwhelming degree, or at the very worst, actively sabotage you or your teammates. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's something you should think about before rolling for this technique. It's already disorienting enough for your average player to be zipping around the map at high speeds, but imagine teleporting through a method as simple as swap. You retain full momentum as well as having to face the exact same direction you engaged the swap in. Without intense grinding, it's an ability that can not only be counterintuitive, but a downright liability. It's not only really hard to use yourself, but it's also an ability that requires your teammates to have a high battle IQ to work synergistically. If you swap them into battle and they aren't prepared for battle, you immediately put them in range to be instantly eliminated. Basically, if you want to go for this build, it would be in your best interest to get a really good feel for the game's physics engine through other playthroughs before going for the switcher role. In terms of matchups, the Switcher build is great against techniques that require physical contact, as physical contact with an attentive Switcher player as an opponent is virtually impossible. The overwhelming physical strength makes both taking him down and withstanding his attacks a difficult task. Even in groups, you aren't too much better off due to his ability to swap with whoever, wherever he wants. Now moving on to weaknesses, the Switcher build doesn't exactly have one clear weakness. If I had to say, I would put it under the blanket category of complex techniques. Any curse technique that can employ an omnidirectional attack in a small space would be effective because it eliminates the opportunity to swap. Any techniques that can disable Boogie Woogie for any reason wouldn't put the Switcher in the worst circumstance, but it also would mean fighting with a heavy disadvantage. Lastly, any technique that would require superior firepower to take down like Maharaga or Mahito would be completely out of the question for the Switcher build in a 1v1. Overall, the Switcher has a really good risk to reward ratio. Even if you do happen to run into one of these direct counters to your ability, it's also really easy to just run away. Unless you're confined by a barrier or ritual, Boogie Woogie can still transport you over long distances. Now, with all of that said, where would I personally rank the Switcher class based on how much I would recommend it to new Jujutsu Kaisen players? In complete honesty, I would rate this build at a 6 out of 10. Now, don't get me wrong, if this rating was for advanced to pro players, it would easily be a 10 out of 10 because of how easy it is to roll and how simple the playstyle really is once you get used to it. Keyword, once you get used to it. There are legitimately a large group of people who will never be able to develop the skills necessary to enjoy this build. The playstyle can simply be too rough to adapt to for some people. I do still give this build props for its good stats and abilities, as even without the first technique, it's still provably a force to be reckoned with. The reason why it gets knocked down so many points in spite of all this is because, well, if Boogie Woogie is used wrong, it isn't just useless, it's downright lethal. This rating takes into account as many factors as possible for the average sorcerer player, and Boogie Woogie, while being a rare ability, is simply just for god tier players. Now, with all that said, there are exceptions to this rule. In fact, we are the exceptions. Sorry, I meant y'all are the exceptions, because I tried the Switcher build, it didn't really land for me.